So take a look at your last pay stub.
Oh, yeah. The fun part.
Right. You see that deduction for the Canada pension plan, or if you're south of the border, U.S. Social Security.
And it usually just hurts to look at.
It does. And you probably think that money is just, I don't know, vanishing into some boring government vault.
Just sitting there gathering dust until you turn 65?
Exactly. But the crazy thing is, right now, today, your specific payroll deduction is out there actively buying up like Asian hyperscale data centers,
Yeah.
taking massive stakes in global video game empires.
Huh.
It's maneuvering through this incredibly high stakes, multi-billion-dollar global financial engine.
Which is wild because, I mean, it's entirely understandable to just view it as another annoying tax.
Oh, for sure.
It's mandatory, it comes out automatically, and the payoff feels like it's, decades away.
Right.
But when you look under the hood, when you see the mechanics of where that money actually goes and how aggressively it's grown, it completely changes how you view your own retirement timeline.
And the looming demographic crisis it's racing against, too.
Oh, absolutely. That's a huge piece of the puzzle.
Well, welcome to this custom deep dive. Today, we're tearing apart the mechanics of the Canadian and U.S. retirement systems.
We really are. We're going straight to the underlying logic.
Right, because we want to find out exactly how these massive funds actually work, why they take the risks they do, and, this is a big one, what happens when your career gets caught in the crossfire of, crossing the border.
Because that happens a lot more than people realize.
It really does. So forget the dry accounting lesson. We're unpacking what's essentially a global financial thriller, and it directly impacts your future. Okay, let's unpack this.
Where do we start?
Let's start with the entry fee. Before we get into data centers and video games, we have to unpack the Canadian system itself. It's basically built on two main pillars.
Right, the CPP and OAS.
Yeah. And confusing those two is like the very first mistake people make.
It's the most common mistake in Canadian financial planning, yeah. They function in entirely different ways.
So the easiest way to think about it, I like this analogy. Think of the CPP as a mandatory group piggy bank.
Okay, I like that.
Your access to it is strictly based on your own sweat and labor.
Yeah.
You basically only get out what you put in.
Right.
But OAS, Old Age Security, that's more like an exclusive club. You get to join simply by living in Canada.
Exactly. So let's break down the mechanics of that CPP piggy bank first.
Sure.
To even be a contributor, you have to be over 18 and earning more than $3,500 a year.
Which is a pretty low bar.
It is. And as of 2026, the basic contribution rate is 5.95%. So you and your employer each chip in that amount.
Up to a certain limit, right?
Up to an income limit they call the YMPE, or the year's maximum pensionable earnings.
Yeah.
For 2026, that ceiling sits at $74,600.
Okay, got it.
But here's the thing. The government realized recently that this formula wasn't going to be enough to sustain modern retirees.
Right. The enhancement.
Exactly. They bolted on a second tier. So to push the ultimate payout higher, there's now an additional 4% contribution required from both you and your employer.
And that's on earnings above that 74,600 cap.
Yep, specifically on earnings between 74,600 and 85,000.
Wow. And if you're self-employed.
Oh, if you're self-employed, you're on the hook for both the employee and employer portions across the board.
Ouch. Yeah, that stings. Okay, so that covers the sweat equity side. But then there's the OAS club.
Right, old age security.
And for OAS, you don't need a single work credit. You don't even need to have ever had a job. The requirement is purely residency-based.
You just have to live there.
Exactly. You just need to have lived in Canada for at least 10 years after turning 18 to get, like, a partial payout, and 40 years to get the absolute maximum.
What's fascinating here is the strict mathematics of timing when you actually claim these benefits, especially the CPP.
Yeah, the timing is everything.
Because you're eligible to take the standard payout at age 65, but you have levers. You can claim it early at 60, or you can delay it all the way to 70.
Wait, let's do the math on that. Because if I delay to 70, I know the system gives you a 42% boost to your monthly payments for the rest of your life.
That's right, 42%.
Which sounds amazing. But I mean, I'm giving up an entire decade of payments to get there.
You are.
So the break-even point on that gamble implies I need to live well into my 80s just to make the delay worth it.
You've hit on the exact actuarial bet the system is making. And on the flip side, if you claim early at 60, you suffer a permanent 36% penalty.
A 36% cut forever.
Forever, because the math is meticulously designed to be actuarially neutral for the average lifespan.
Right.
But the real issue isn't just when you claim it, it's what you actually get.
Yeah, let's talk about those numbers because they are a huge reality check.
They really are.
So early 2026, the absolute maximum CPP payout at age 65 is around $1,500 a month. But the average new beneficiary is actually only getting about $800 a month.
Yeah.
Add in the average OAS payment, which is around $700, and you're barely hitting $1,500 total.
It's not a lot.
That doesn't even cover rent for a one-bedroom apartment in most Canadian cities.
Yeah.
So if this is the grand retirement system, why is the payout so incredibly low?
Because the government explicitly engineered the CPP to be a foundation. It was never, ever designed to replace your entire working income.
Just a piece of it.
Exactly.
Right.
Historically, it was built to replace exactly 1/4 of a worker's average earnings up to that yearly limit.
Right.
Now, those recent enhancements we talked about, they're slowly pushing that replacement rate to 1/3, but it's still just the concrete slab.
Right, you had to build the rest of the house yourself.
Exactly. Using personal vehicles, specifically RRSPs, which are registered retirement savings plans, sort of like a traditional 401k in the U.S.
Yep.
And TFSAs, tax-free savings accounts, which function a lot like a Roth IRA.
And just to make that foundation even trickier, there's the OAS clawback.
Oh, the clawback. Yeah.
Because OAS is funded by general tax revenues,
Yeah.
like everyday income and sales taxes, not a dedicated payroll deduction. It is fiercely means-tested.
Very fiercely.
If your net retirement income in 2025 exceeds roughly $91,000, the government starts taking back 15% of your OAS for every dollar over that threshold.
And if you hit around $148,000 in personal income,
Your OAS drops to absolute zero.
gone, which forces a severe strategic decision for people.
How so?
Well, think about it. If you aggressively pull money from your RSP in your late 60s to go on trips or whatever, you might accidentally spike your taxable income.
Oh, and then you lose your entire OAS benefit for that year.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay, so if Canada's relying on this very strict, heavily penalized math to determine the payouts, how is the money actually sitting there waiting for you in 30 years?
That's the billion-dollar question.
Literally. Because, as we established, it's not just sitting in a giant vault in Ottawa gathering dust. Here's where it gets really interesting.
It does. To understand the modern CPP, you really have to look back at the terrifying crisis of the 1990s.
In the 90s, what happened?
Back then, Canada operated on a pay-as-you-go system. The taxes collected from young workers on Friday were literally sent out to retirees on Monday.
Wow. Hand them out.
Literally. But demographics were shifting fast, people were living longer, birth rates were dropping. So by 1996, the chief actuary actually sounded the alarm
Saying what?
that the CPP fund was on track to be completely bankrupt by 2015.
That is a demographic time bomb.
Precisely. So Canada made a radical pivot. They abandoned the pure pay-as-you-go model and decided they had to aggressively pre-fund the future.
Okay.
So in 1999, they launched CPP investments with a starting transfer of just $12.1 million.
Which, I mean, is practically pocket change for a national pension.
Right. It's nothing.
But fast forward to December 2025, and that fund has exploded into a $780.7 billion empire.
The scale is staggering. I mean, they've generated hundreds of billions in pure cumulative net income simply by refusing to play it safe.
It's almost like they realized that, building a massive fortress in Canada wasn't enough to survive the coming winter.
Yeah.
They needed to buy the land, the trade routes, and the neighboring kingdoms all over the globe to ensure the fortress never ran out of supplies. Because only 12% of the CPP fund is actually invested inside Canada.
Right. The vast majority is deployed globally. We're talking roughly 47% in the United States, 19% in the Asia-Pacific region, and 17% in Europe.
Wow.
This is the execution of what they call the total portfolio approach.
And the specific assets they're buying with your payroll deductions are just wild.
Oh, yeah.
Your retirement money currently owns a 12% stake in AirTrunk.
Right. The data center guys.
Yeah, they build hyperscale data centers across Asia to power the AI boom. And it owns a massive chunk of Keyword Studios, which is a UK company providing tech services for global video games.
They're everywhere.
They even own a chunk of Quebecor, the Canadian telecom giant.
Well, the underlying logic of this global expansion is risk insulation.
Makes sense.
Think about what happens if the Canadian economy suffers a severe localized recession. Unemployment spikes, wage growth stagnates.
That directly damages the CPP's main revenue stream. which is payroll contributions.
Exactly. So if the CPP fund was also entirely invested in Canadian companies, a local recession would be a devastating double blow. By diversifying globally into Asian data centers or European tech, they completely insulate the fund from domestic Canadian shocks.
It completely reframes that line item on your pay stub.
Yeah.
You aren't just paying a tax, you are actively funding the infrastructure powering the internet in Japan.
Yeah.
And the payoff is undeniable. Because of this long-term calculated risk-taking, the Independent Chief Actuary of Canada has certified the fund as completely financially sustainable for at least the next 75 years.
Which is an incredible safety net. But the brilliance of that Canadian pivot in the 90s becomes glaringly obvious when we contrast it with the massive system down south.
Yes, let's put CPP head-to-head with U.S. Social Security, because the basic mechanics look somewhat similar at first glance.
They do.
U.S. Social Security was born in 1935, and it takes a slightly higher cut, 6.2% from the employee and another 6.2% from the employer.
Right.
The income cap is also vastly higher. In 2025, you pay that 6.2% on earnings all the way up to $176,100.
And consequently, the payouts are much higher. A worker who maximizes their contributions and delays, claiming until age 70, could see a maximum monthly benefit of over $5,100 in 2025.
Over $5,000 a month. But the vaults, how the U.S. stores and grows this money, are completely different.
Night and day.
While Canada is out there buying tech companies and private equity, U.S. Social Security taxes flow into two main trust funds, the Old Age and Survivors Insurance Fund and the Disability Insurance Fund.
Yeah, right.
And those funds are invested entirely, 100%, in U.S. Treasury securities.
Which brings us back to that demographic time bomb Canada diffused in the 90s. The U.S. is still operating heavily on a pay-as-you-go philosophy, and right now the massive baby boomer generation is retiring, meaning more money is flying out the door than the current workforce is putting in. According to the 2024 Trustees Report, the main retirement fund is projected to deplete its reserves by 2033.
2033, that is not far away.
No, it's not. And after that, continuing payroll tax income will only be enough to cover 79% of scheduled benefits.
Wait, let's look at the mechanics of that. U.S. Treasuries are considered the safest financial asset on the planet.
Sure.
They're backed by the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. So why is the U.S. facing a massive 21% benefit cut in less than a decade, while Canada is out there buying volatile equities and is certified safe for 75 years?
Because safety in the short term guarantees failure in the long term when you are fighting demographics. This raises an important question about their investment beliefs. CPP Investments explicitly operates on the principle that taking on risk is inseparable from maximizing long-term returns.
Right.
You simply cannot outpace inflation and a shrinking worker-to-retire ratio by playing it safe in low-yield bonds.
But it's not like the U.S. managers are just, oblivious. They're trapped by the system's design, right?
Yeah, exactly. The U.S. system requires immense, constant liquidity to pay tens of millions of retirees every single month. They cannot lock up billions of dollars in a 10-year private equity deal for an Asian data center.
Made cash on hand.
Yes. Canada, on the other hand, because they pre-funded a massive reserve, has what they call comparative advantage.
Which means
They have a multi-generational time horizon. They can weather a 10-year stock market crash and still come out ahead because they don't have to sell those assets to pay today's pensioners.
that structural difference is absolutely fascinating. The U.S. is essentially forced to optimize for Tuesday, while Canada is optimizing for 2075.
Exactly.
So if these two systems operate on completely opposing philosophies, what happens when a single worker's career gets caught in the crossfire?
Oh man, cross-border financial planning is where the mechanics get incredibly complex.
I can imagine.
But thankfully, there are international treaties in place to prevent total chaos.
Okay, so imagine you're an IT professional. You work 15 years in Toronto, paying into the CPP. Then you get recruited to Austin, Texas, and spend the next 15 years paying into Social Security. Do you just lose half your benefits in both countries?
Not if you leverage the totalization agreement between the U.S. and Canada.
Totalization agreement.
Yes. First, this agreement prevents double taxation while you're actually working.
Okay, good.
If your U.S. company sends you to Canada for a 3-year stint, you don't pay into both systems simultaneously. You secure a certificate of coverage, like the Canadian form CPT 56, which proves you are still contributing to your home system.
But what about when you actually retire? Because to get U.S. Social Security, you generally need 40 work credits.
Right, which is roughly 10 years of work.
So if you only worked in Texas for 4 years before moving back to Toronto, the U.S. system essentially says, sorry, you didn't hit the threshold.
Under normal rules, yes. You would get nothing from the U.S.
Ouch.
But the totalization agreement allows you to combine your life history. Yeah. You can use your years of Canadian CPP contributions to artificially push you over the 10-year U.S. eligibility line.
That is super helpful.
It is. The specific mechanism just requires you to have a minimum of 1.5 years or 6 credits actually worked in the U.S. system to initiate this combination.
And it calculates a pro rata share, right? I mean, they don't give you a full U.S. pension for 4 years of work.
Correct. It calculates a theoretical full benefit and then pays you a fraction based strictly on the time you spent in the U.S. system.
Makes sense.
And this mechanism works in reverse, too, to help you hit the 10-year residency requirement for the Canadian OAS Club.
It all sounds incredibly fair. But as with everything involving the IRS, I'm guessing there's a trap.
There's always a trap.
Let's go back to our IT pro who worked 15 years in Toronto and 15 in Texas. You hit retirement age.
Yeah.
You legitimately earned a CPP pension. And you legitimately earned a Social Security pension. You assume you're getting 2 great checks. Then the IRS sends you a letter saying they are slashing your U.S. Social Security payment simply because Canada is paying you.
Yeah, that's the windfall elimination provision, or the WEP.
The WP.
It's a harsh reality for cross-border workers, but there's a mechanical reason for it. The U.S. Social Security formula is highly progressive.
Meaning?
It's designed to replace a much higher percentage of income for low-wage earners. So if the U.S. system only sees 15 years of your earnings, it mistakenly assumes you were a low-wage worker for your entire life.
Ah.
And it artificially inflates your benefit to help you out.
But you weren't poor. You were just living in Toronto making a great salary.
Exactly. So the WEP is the IRS's way of saying, wait a minute, you aren't a low-income worker, you were paying into a foreign pension.
I see.
So they recalculate your benefit and claw back that progressive boost. It basically prevents what they view as double dipping.
It's brutal. But to balance the scales, the cross-border tax advisors reveal a rather pleasant counterintuitive quirk about how the U.S. treats that Canadian money once you actually get it.
This is one of my favorite things. It is one of the strangest loopholes in cross-border tax strategy. The IRS actually treats your Canadian CPP income better than the Canadian Revenue Agency does.
Wait, really? Because if you retire in Toronto, the Canadian government taxes 100% of your CPP income at your standard marginal rate.
Yep. But if you take that exact same tension and retire to Florida,
the IRS gives you a massive break.
They do. Under the tax treaty, the U.S. only taxes 85% of your CPP income.
Wow.
And frequently at a lower federal rate than you would face in Canada anyway. The remaining 15% is completely tax-free.
Which perfectly illustrates why you have to look at the mechanics, not just the assumptions.
Totally.
Where you physically plant yourself in a retirement completely changes the math.
And that is the overarching reason we dissect these systems. Whether you are 25 years old and just looking at your first pay stub, or 65 and mapping out withdrawal strategies, understanding these mechanisms is vital.
It really is.
Knowing which levers to pull, how the funds are aggressively grown, and the tax traps waiting at the border, that is the absolute difference between merely surviving your retirement and actively designing it.
Well said. We've covered massive ground today. We decoded the sweat equity piggy bank of the CPP and the residency club of the OAS.
We did.
We walked through the 1990s crisis that forced Canada to pre-fund a $780 billion global fortress, buying up data centers to insulate against domestic recessions.
A huge pivot.
We contrasted that with the U.S. Treasury model, which is currently losing a massive race against changing demographics, and we navigated the WEP traps of crossing the border.
It's a lot to process.
It is, but to leave you with something to really chew on, let's look at a report from the CPP Insights Institute titled The Longevity Dividend.
Oh, this is a great paper.
The core thesis is that we are rapidly becoming a super-aged society where people routinely live significantly longer, healthier lives.
Which fundamentally alters the actuarial tables these entire systems are built upon.
Exactly. Think about the mechanical differences we just discussed. If we are all living to 95, a pay-as-you-go system mathematically collapses.
You can't have 2 workers supporting one retiree for 30 years of retirement. It just doesn't work.
Right. Which means the global risk-taking private equity approach of the Canadian model might not just be an interesting alternative for the future.
It might be the only way.
It might be the only mathematical way any country survives the longevity boom. Will the entire concept of a fixed retirement age disappear, replaced by multi-decade global investments?
It's entirely possible.
It is something to mull over until our next deep dive.